somebody goes wrong, I want to know who to yell at. I'm not going to yell at the AI. Is it a technology failure or is it an organizational alignment failure? Organizations have a roadmap for what that looks like really well-defined expectations of what the pilot can do. I like to say I don't subscribe to the field of dreams model. I don't think if you build it, they will come. Is the goal now just to say AI is going to do the demand plan for you? Or is it actually to think about how do we make each one of those people more productive?
Welcome to the Entrepreneur's Logbook podcast. I'm your host, Zach Bernard. You can find me on social at @It'sZachB. In each episode, I bring on experts from various industries for you to learn about their strategies and insights driving extreme business growth. Today, we're joined by Russ Halper, founder and managing director of Insight Kitchen, an AI native consultancy focused on something that a lot of firms talk about, but they rarely deliver on: operational AI embedded directly into the processes that actually run a business by leveraging deep cross-functional expertise in supply chain, revenue management, and AI. Russ's career, interestingly enough, started with a first project at the real Willy Wonka candy factory, where he worked on production scheduling, and from there he spent the next 2 decades at the intersection of AI, data science, supply chain, and revenue management, working with various Fortune companies. He helped grow a boutique analytic firm from 16 people to roughly 100 across 3 countries before it was acquired by Accenture, where he went on to lead their West Market unique generative AI practice. And then after seeing firsthand how the traditional consulting model is kind of misaligned with what it actually takes for AI to drive real outcome, Russ decided to, step out to build Insight Kitchen, a firm that's designated to around the result instead of the deliverable aspect of things. Russ, it's great to have you on the show. Welcome aboard.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Cool. Well, one of the things that I always like to ask anyone that comes on the show, it is a business, it is an entrepreneurship podcast, and you've obviously been around the block to put it very simply here, is if you had to restart your company, we'll just take Insight Kitchen specifically. If you had to restart your company from scratch, what's maybe the one thing that you feel you would do differently?
It's a really good question. And there's one answer here where it's not one thing. There's a lot of things you could look and say you can do differently, and some of them are little and some of them are big. But if I had to think about what the journey's been like in the past couple of years as we got started, one of the things that I found the most interesting or unexpected was the emotional journey, right? That comes with actually starting something like this, where you're leaving a large organization to go kind of into the wild to start something new. Had some experience in the past being a partner at a young firm, but starting from scratch is a whole different world. Mm-hmm. And then there's a part of it of how do you get started? How do you go and put something in the world that doesn't exist? And then as you start bringing people on board, you get to see them be able to not only contribute, but also be a part of it. And the thing that's been probably the biggest learning for me along the way is not just for me what an experience it's been, but being able to connect some of our team to some of the opportunities they have. And even in a relatively short time, seeing them grow. And so I think when I look at what would we do differently, it'd be more about how would I set myself up for the expectations of what that journey is going to look like. But I think part of it also is you just got to get started. There's no way to figure it all out. There's lots of little questions I figured out along the way. We figured out along the way. You could be should have done that different and this different. And I don't think you could look at those and say we should have done those differently from the beginning, because there would have been no way to know what you should have done had you not gone through some of those experiences.
Yeah, I feel like that question, I always like to ask it, but in a way, the way I look at it, it's hey, you have to go through these steps to learn, improve, adjust. You're not going to get to where you are now without going through these steps first.
Yeah, and it's there's 1,000 sayings around this, right? Just get started. Don't let perfect be the enemy of progress. And even in the relatively short period of time that we've been doing this, right, AI has shifted dramatically, right? And so you have other learnings that you have to adjust in the marketplace, how clients are receiving things, what capabilities you could bring to them. How do you need to grow the expertise in your team and keep them cutting edge? So those are things you can't learn up front, or up front. You got to learn them and adapt as things evolve.
Yeah, but yeah, like even like the emotion side of things that you mentioned, like I feel like like an entrepreneur, you just go on like the roller coaster. Like it's an up and down battle. You work through it. I mean, you can't really get ready for it. It's not. It's only when you jump into the ring that you really see like what that emotion looks like. And I mean, for better or worse, I feel that it's worth doing. We always everyone has a different like career path, but as entrepreneurs, you kind of have to dive into the deep end here. But shifting gears like a little bit here, because we've had like I would say like a fair amount of people on like the show, like a lot of different backgrounds, like marketing, consulting, leadership, all that fun stuff. I don't think we've had like anyone. I mean, I could be wrong, but I don't think so. I don't think we've had anyone on like the more like operational, like AI side of things. Like I'll tell you, we have a lot of people that talk about using AI, leveraging AIs, but it's more like they got into it like 2 years ago or something like that. They're using ChatGPT and everything, but it's less like really integrated within like the company, really on like an operational level. And that's like some what you've been doing like the past like couple of years. And one thing I'd love to understand is like how Insight Kitchen works. Like when someone comes to you, obviously there's different type of clients, like companies that you work with, but I'd love to understand like how that process looks like to be able to actually create something that gets implemented and embedded within like the day-to-day operation, like the long run. And it's not just a project that lasts a month and then no one uses it after a couple of weeks here.
Yeah. So the great question. There's a lot there. I'm going to maybe unpack a few pieces of it to get to the final answer. But when you look at new technologies that come out, right, and what generative AI has been, agentic AI in the past several years, right, has been just incredible. There's often a technologist first approach on how you want to bring those to market because that's where the origin of that is coming from, right? And you have organizations that have strong venture funding behind them, obligations to scale, right, and it drives certain behaviors and how they bring that stuff to market, right, and want to be able to approach things that have broad applicability raw across broad areas of business, right? You have a better client portfolio or a larger client portfolio, larger market you can address. And so what we often see, what I've seen kind of in a few times when you think about new technologies is you come up with horizontal products that you can put in the marketplace as the starting point. And then from there, you bring in like more specific things that get built with those as capabilities. And I think AI is like no different there. Where we've really decided to focus is in spaces where you have to have deep domain expertise to drive effective solutions. And that becomes hard oftentimes when you have like a horizontal technology because as smart as it may be, as revolutionary as it may be, there's very specific operational constraints or strategies or theory that needs to be brought into place to make that actually effective, right? So supply chain is a great example of that. Of when you think about what does it mean to drive solutions for supply chains, you can't just know the math or the data science. You need to also understand like what does it mean to have a better forecast? How do you actually implement this in a way that drives value with the business process, right? What does it mean for a business process if I'm building a solution? What type of feature rich, information dense interfaces do I need for operational processes? And how do you tie all those things together? And that was the gap in the market that we decided to go chase. And one of the things that is hard about that is you need to have that cross-functional domain knowledge to be able to chase it. And you can have two companies that have like sell directly competing products with very different supply chains, and if because of that, different ways you need to actually go to market, right? You could have one consumer goods company that's doing direct store delivery to the grocery store, another one that's doing warehouse replenishment, and that might be very different things for what does your transportation look like? What's the way you need the capabilities of planning your supply chain? How do you think about distributing product, forecasting, and how do you then take all those and bring those into AI that actually drives measurable results? Is a hard thing. So we, for better or worse, we chose to take on something hard. But that's where we decided we want to put our stake in the ground and be great. And it's more an extension of what I've done for most of my career. Having done, I mean, before, feels like there's also a bit of a rebranding, right? Beyond generative, everything that used to be machine learning is now AI, and that included everything previously that was data science, and that included a lot of things that were analytics, right? So a lot of these things are evolving and growing together, and there's a lot of confusion around messaging, and so we work with a lot of clients around how do we unpack all those things. Typically, when we talk to somebody, it's often coming from a functional need. So when somebody comes to us, we had somebody talk to us about markdown optimization in a retail context and how do they think about, better managing end-of-life inventory. There's a lot of things we can use AI in that context for, but fundamentally the outcome's still that, how do I improve my, profitability of that lot of product when I think about, my, average realization of sales price. And so, the other thing that we see happen is a lot of times organizations don't really know where they want to start with it. And so there are times when we're coming in to help them figure out what's the roadmap, what's obtainable, what are the things that you can do today. And it's a bit of a challenge because one, the technology is evolving really fast, but if you want to go from like a POC to something that's actually working today, it's got to drive value today. And so there's this world of we want to drive value today with what exists today, but we also want that to get better as AI gets better, right? And so we can help organizations. We help organizations in those ways. We've helped them with those more point solutions, and other times around, how do we build AI or data science, machine learning is now branded sometimes as AI into products that also work in this domain. So there's not necessarily one path to market. Or how we help.
It's different,
but it's always about that cross-functional lens that we're able to bring.
And like I had like an interesting conversation, I think maybe like a couple of days ago with someone else on the podcast, and he was talking about like everyone is saying like, oh, like we need to be integrating AI within like what we do. Like I'm hearing like all these different use cases, like we need to be on AI, like we cannot like fall behind. But I have a feeling, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Russ, that sometimes maybe people are like rushing into it, that they don't know how to effectively approach it. They just decide, oh, we need AI, let's build this thing, but they haven't like proven that they should actually be implementing it. Like you do the math, it's like, okay, it's going to save us like an hour a week, but it's going to take us like 5 months like build. Like, is that really worth like building it here?
I mean, like businesses are businesses, and there needs to be the ROI, right, and what you're going to do.
Of course.
I think AI has got a bit of a brand out there, which is which drives a lot of iteration in places that it shouldn't, right? If you abstract the name AI, artificial intelligence, from what it actually is, right, and you think about the things you can do with it, there are great things. And organizations, I think, rightfully are trying to figure out how do we bring it in. But sometimes there's a desire to shoehorn it into places when it might not fit, or it might not actually really drive the value, or it's maybe a fairly crude way to think about how it might help, right? We we just want to replace people versus thinking about what's actually driving measurable outcomes for the process. And so it's confusing, and that's one of the places we've seen companies kind of fail or failure modes, right? Is that strong desire to, no matter what, we want to leverage AI. So I often tell people, look, we'll help you figure out if you should use AI, right? How to use AI, and then if you want, we can help you build the AI.
I think like the reason I was asking that and mentioned that was like that person I mentioned to that was on the podcast mentioned like, like I was speaking to like a Fortune 500 like company CEO. I was like, hey, and not CEO, CMO. He's like, oh, like I'm seeing like all these little things like about AI, like we need to be doing this. And he started working with them. He's like, do you actually need this? Like what, why? And then like once you dig into it, it's like, okay, maybe we need to like reevaluate the situation here. But I feel it's always a different story with like everyone, depending on like your use case and everything. But one thing that I feel is like a pretty common one, and I'd be curious to hear, because you're a data guy, like you obviously would know that. It's like one thing that you hear a lot is that a lot of people are like, hey, I need to have my data like perfectly clean before they even start thinking about AI, because they're like, oh, if my data is not clean, I feed it to the AI, it's gonna be like a complete mess. Is that actually true? Or is that more like a myth that's like holding people back here? We can play Mythbuster here.
I think it's putting the wrong constraint first often, right? Not
Okay.
always. Like there's, I could find cases where that's an issue.
Yeah.
But when a lot of clients that we've worked with, right, what they're thinking about first is let's drive the outcomes for the business. And so if you start that as your foundation point for how do you think about what are the capabilities you need to then drive those outcomes, data becomes part of that. But with the data, with the data an organization has, you can have better outcomes with that same data, right? You can imagine two identical organizations with the same quality of data, and I mean every organization has data issues. I can think about a top 10 apparel and footwear retailer I've worked with, where I could argue the data was all over the map, and a mid-size apparel and footwear retailer I worked with that's been very disciplined as they grow about building reasonably good data.
Yeah.
And so, one way I like to think about this is you just got to get started. And sometimes the best way to actually get your data better is to pull it along with the business initiative. There's oftentimes places where it's like you will spend infinite amounts of time working on your data, and never actually get to the point where, one, you feel like it's great, and two, then you're actually getting the outcomes and the value from that. This is one of the things where I see a lot of large consulting firms play is data-driven transformation and wanting to start with these large data programs. And sometimes it's important,
Yeah.
right? If you want to be able to have views across wide swaths of complicated organizations, you need to have access to all that data. But I think increasingly the need to have it perfectly harmonized and co-located is less important than actually the need to have the context around where the data is and where it sits, right? Because we have new capabilities that allow you to be able to access that data in different places and be able to better work with it and rationalize it. It's not, I mean, it takes work, right? But it's a qualifying factor, but I think it's too often used as a stage gate for progress in a lot of situations, especially when you're getting like functionally specific in certain areas of the business. It could be hard.
Interesting. It's like some people are using that as like an excuse, like, oh, the data is, it's not like organized, like maybe we don't use it yet. I mean, a good example of that, we were like building like an internal tool. We had like 60,000 rows, and I know in your world that's probably not a lot when we're talking about like data like a Google sheet. It was a complete mess, but I was like, you know what, maybe we take a bit of time, we organize it. But I pushed it off for so long because it was like, I don't feel like cleaning all this data to be able to use it. And then I took a weekend. It's like, let's clean like the basic of it, make sure that I can use it in like some function. And now we have pretty clean data. It works for what we want to do. It's helpful. And I feel like a lot of like leaders are gonna like push off like doing the initiative to make sure that they have the data they need. It doesn't obviously need to be 99% there or anything, but
I had a large, so Fortune 500 client I was talking to at some point. It was for like, it was a civic supply chain function in that client. This is a decade ago, right? This is before ChatGPT, right? Back in when big data was the craze. I remember them telling me, we got a big data problem. We got a couple 100,000 rows in the spreadsheet. But I mean, labels aside, right? Again, separate the brand from the technology. That was important to them, right? Those couple 100,000 rows were really critical for running that business process. So, sure, we've had situations where there's, in fact, most of the time, much larger data sets than that.
yeah.
But that's what they needed for them to be successful when they were building this solution, right? And that was their hard problem that they were trying to overcome. So I think there's maybe a little bit less principled than many when I come to brands and things around technologies and things like that, and I'm more about like, let's get after it, and let's show we can drive the measurable outcomes for businesses, and especially when you're working in operational areas, working in supply chain, working in revenue management, most of the operations are fairly quantifiable. You look at supply chains that are often cost and customer service driven, and there's, well, I don't think we need to get into it, but many metrics that are important. And, when I looked at our semiconductor clients, right, the way they think about measuring success in their supply chain is very different than a consumer goods company, which is very different than like a parcel delivery, right, service. But it's generally fairly quantifiable, which means you can do different types of things in there. Now, the other challenge is a lot of it's very numerical, right? Because it's so discrete, a lot of the actions, and a lot of those actions can be captured well in data. You have lots of numerical, like decisions that you can measure with like actual numbers. And now we're trying to apply technology, which is really, really good with text and images and video, and be able to apply it to the data. And how do we actually get it to drive outcomes for us? And it's not to say that it's not to say at all that it's bad in those areas, but I work with we had one client which is a very well-known Silicon Valley giant, and I was talking to the VP there about their forecasting, and they are I'll say they're very invested in AI. It's a core part of their business, and he was saying, we can't use it for forecasting. Like, we use it to talk to the forecast, to describe scenarios. We get the other models to run scenarios for us, but it's not the same as just throwing it and hoping it's going to give us a good forecast. At least today, that's where we see it.
Yeah, interesting. And one question I wanted to ask you here, because I feel like this applies not only to small businesses, large Fortune companies, or anything like that, but you hear a lot about companies starting an AI pilot. Works well, a couple first weeks, you're like, wow, we spent all this time building this, it's working, great. But after, a couple weeks or so, it just never goes company-wide, where everyone is using it. It doesn't get actually integrated within the company's operation. I'd be kind of curious to hear what's actually happening. What separates a project that actually sticks versus one that just dies after the demo or the beta here.
There are several things that can affect that. I break it down often into two broad categories. Right? Is it a technology failure, or is it an organizational alignment failure? And those two things aren't necessarily discrete. Yeah. But oftentimes when we think about going from how do we run a pilot and know if that's going to drive the outcome we want to have and be able to prove that we can go from there forward. Right? We think it's really important organizations have a roadmap for what that looks like really well-defined expectations of what the pilot can do. And, hopefully they're working with partners that don't oversell what the technology can get done for them. And that's one of the biggest things that we see is, organizations picking, partners, be those consultants, technology vendors or whatnot, that in order to win the business are willing to dramatically overpromise what can come out of that, run a pilot, things end up well short. And then you have not just the challenge of the gap in expectations, but now you have an ongoing trust issue with them as a vendor or as a partner along the way. And that's one of the places where, generally a pilot is going to have a gap in it. That's why it's a pilot, but it's important to make sure that there's a lot of clarity and transparency on where those might be up front and, how we get from pilot to something that's a little bit more robust and is actually attainable in the short to medium term.
Yeah, having some expectations set and alignment, where it's gonna be used, how it's gonna be used. But I like the fact that you mentioned the organizational alignment, because I feel a lot of people are gonna create this amazing product and then it's no one uses it. It's why are you not using it? Like maybe there was some a bit of market research, like market feedback you needed to collect before creating the tool, because maybe no one wants to use it because it's useless and it's just slower. It takes more time to do what they want or what they're like used to. So I imagine a big part of the puzzle is making sure that people actually like integrate that within their maybe not culture, but like their day to day using the tool. Is that something that you see being like a big issue with a lot of companies on the like alignment side of things?
Yeah. Oh, I'm going to say too. There's a case when people don't use it, but there's also a case where people don't use it, or people like using it, but it doesn't actually drive anything different in terms of an outcome for the business, right? So
Okay.
you could get something that's used, and all my results that I can measure on the back end all look exactly the same. So what's the
Yeah.
value of me making that investment in that?
Yeah. That's
Um,
fair.
so I think there's a couple of failure modes that can happen uh,
Yeah.
with it. But in terms of like the usage, I like to say I don't subscribe to the field of dreams model. Like I don't think if you build it, they will come. You can have the best solution, right? The best
Yeah.
technology you put in place in the world, but it like when people have to change the way they do their day-to-day business, their day-to-day work, that's hard.
Yeah.
Oftentimes when you're running a pilot, they're doing that work on top of their already existing work. So now you're adding like just overhead to them to then prove out with this new capability that's telling them to work differently than they did before, that it's going to be successful. And that's a hard thing. That's a high bar, right? That we
Yeah.
need to make sure uh, organizations to make sure that they get over when they're going through those types of engagements.
Yeah. It's hilarious because like we're having this conversation. I'm in the middle of doing that specifically, where we're like rolling out a new tool for the team, something different from like what they're used to, making sure that they're using it. It's like exactly like what you're talking about. So I feel like it's an interesting conversation because I'm dealing with that right now. But I feel obviously we're a smaller company, but when you think about like these big fortune companies, it's like okay, like there's definitely a lot going on there that you want to make sure that all the wheels are in motion, the ducks in a row, and there's no issues going on there because that can really affect the bottom line of a company there.
Yeah, yeah, and you have AI might be this great new technology, but people are still people. Uh,
Yeah.
people change is still hard.
Mhm.
I believe that organizations still want to hold somebody accountable, right? If something goes
Yeah.
wrong, people. I like to say that if somebody goes wrong, the CEO is going to ask their C-suite is going to ask the VP, and at some point, somebody's going to be accountable for that. I was
Yeah.
talking to a friend of mine who's another entrepreneur. Had a couple exits in the SaaS world, and his words to me were, "Damn right, if something goes wrong, I want to know who to yell at. I'm not going to yell at the AI." Uh, but it's true though, right?
Yeah.
People are react to how they're measured. People are still
Yeah.
people, and it's easy to lose sight of that when we think
Hmm.
about something new like agentic models interacting with the business process.
Yeah. Cool. One last piece of the puzzle I want to like touch on here before we like wrap things up is you talk a lot about like the difference between just like AI and like the operational AI side of things and like how a lot of industries like supply chain specifically have been like very a bit slow to like adapt like these AI tools. Where do you see this like I guess heading over like the next few years and what should business leaders be paying attention to right now? Because there's obviously so much things being said about AI but probably not all of it is relevant for them at the moment.
So there's some areas where when you look at what AI can do, there's really natural fits. I mean, you see code and co-pilots is one, right?
Yeah.
You're writing text that's code, and they're already geared towards writing text, so that's actually real, great fit. You see areas in customer service and
Mm.
image generation and media, and a long list of others that we won't go through all right now, where it's really fitting well. And then you see places where it's slower to adopt, and
Hmm.
part is that is the complexity that happens in those areas of the business, right? And uh, you know, part of it also I think about it's like what's the cost of a wrong decision, right?
Yeah.
You show somebody the wrong video to select on a Netflix homepage. It's the cost of a wrong decision is not that bad, right?
Yeah.
You send a shipment to a wrong customer, that's expensive, right? Both financially and potentially from a relationship point of view. So, there's different bars, levels of scrutiny that need to happen to be able to use this in certain parts of the organization. And there's different levels of complexity that's needed to make sure that it's done in a way that actually drives outcomes. And what that means oftentimes is the sort of the natural way people think about applying it doesn't necessarily translate well. Originally, I think a lot of the thoughts were like, can we just reduce our headcount? Right? I have an organization where like we have 1,000 demand planners, we want to get down to 400, and it's okay. Is the goal now just to say AI is going to do the demand plan for you, or is it actually to think about how do we make each one of those people more productive? And if you ask that question differently, you're going to get to different outcomes when you think about how you're going to apply it. Not only that, in the operations world, a lot of the technologies that exist today take a long time to build, right? So a lot of the players in the planning space, like I'd say most of them are technologies that were built long before AI came out, and so they're often ingrained in certain ways of operating, and they're now trying to figure out how they can bring that into the platform, right, or bring the capabilities in the platform to leverage it. And some are doing it more successfully than others. I think they're all trying, but they have to do it within the context of they might have a large client base with lots of different clients that are on legacy technology they have to continue to support. So it's just a bit of the natural. When we talk about operational AI, I really think about how do you embed it into the operations, right? How do you bring it in a way that drives that captures the complexity that is inherently there, and brings in the thoughts around how do you need to operate as a business and be able to actually see the results. And it's hard. It's hard.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of people are going to use ChatGPT or Claude and are going to consider the business AI powered or anything like that. I mean, you see that so often, but that's just using AI. That's not like operationally like integrating within like your process, making sure that you're actually driving an outcome. I feel like if you're using AI, you're more utilizing it in terms of productivity maybe, and then operationally, it's for the actual results.
There's a world where I can use AI to help me write an email.
Definitely.
There's a world where I can use AI to, which we have one large client that does, be able to run scenarios where I can go and type in a prompt, which is tell me what my capacity plan looks like if I were to increase my demand by 5% across the board, and then that then goes and calls the right type of model to run a scenario, which might not necessarily still be an agentic model. And then that's coming out with a solution that, is then being spit back into the planner who could then go look at it and actually embed it into their operations that way, or be able to use it as a planning, I hate the word co-pilot, but, assistant along the way. And that's one of the places I think more and more organizations are seeing value is being able to think about, or people are finding value is being able to use AI just in general as a thought partner. Hey, I'm thinking about this. Let me refine it. Here's what I think, and you go back and forth with it, kind of as a buddy to think through problems, right? Yeah. The analogy of that when you're actually thinking about your plan, how is it catching? How is it looking after you, right? With exception management and as a planner, does it have your back and make sure that when you're putting a number out there, you're finding the issues and with the plan before the number is published, before the organization acts on it, and so you're not waiting on. If you're building a forecast, what's my forecast accuracy to know how I did? Can I find those issues up front before I actually go and, start doing things with inventory based on that forecast?
Yeah, I love that. Well, thanks, Russ, for joining. There was a lot of things to unpack here, so I think a lot of people are going to get value out of it. I mean, I know I did because there's a couple of things you were saying. I'm like, crap, I think we're guilty of that. I think we're going to have to adjust a couple things based on what Russ was saying here. But no, a lot to unpack. What we'll do is we're going to put all your info in the description. But as usual, if people want to reach out to you, get in touch with you, what's kind of the best way to go about doing that here?
So always open to emails and always open to have a conversation. My email is Russell, Russell, at insightkitchen.ai. And, if executives are having problems out there, always happy to have a friendly conversation. And the commitment I make, and anybody who's worked with me has heard me say this, is look, if we can help you, I'm happy to tell you that. But if we can't help you, I'm going to tell you that too. So, and often if we can't help you, I can help you find the people that can.
I love that. Yeah, I have a similar motto. It does make sense when I tell people, so, oh yeah, we can, big promises will help you. And it's like, no, we couldn't actually help you. So I love that here. But Russ, thank you so much for joining here. And to our listeners, if you've enjoyed this episode, like, subscribe, comment, all that fun stuff. Reach out to Russ here. We're going to put all these links in the description here. If you want to connect, reach out to him here. And then, yeah, until then, keep pushing and we'll see you in the next one.